Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Just Work podcast. We now have Just Work with Wesley Faulkner. I'll tell you why in a minute, but first of all, Wesley, how are you? Tell everybody about yourself.
Hello, my name is Wesley Faulkner. I am a first generation American. So my background is mostly around different ways of being around people, being with an accent from another country, or really not understanding pop culture references because that was me growing up. And I have not had the pleasure of running a company, but I have been the employee of many. And so I hope to bring to this podcast the perspective of someone who worked for a lot of companies that were in various forms of transparent, abusive, and also in sizes. So big corporations, small startups, all the above, and mostly in tech. So currently I am in developer relations, which is almost like a kind of developer marketing, but slightly different, but we won't get into that. That's a different podcast. But I'm happy to be here and glad that I can co-host Just Work with you.
Thrilled that you are here, Wesley. So I met Wesley when you wrote to me, right? You had read Just Work. So talk to me, not just to me, but to everyone, a little bit about what your thoughts were about Just Work. And because what you said, I have rarely felt so validated as I did when you wrote to me, because it was exactly what I was hoping this book would do.
Well, part of being in tech is, I think, the illusion of being in
Meritocracy.
Your meritocracy, yes, where like you work hard, you do the right things, and you get rewarded.
Yeah,
and
that's the big lie of tech.
Yes, huge lie, and it's one of the things where if things don't go right, you really kind of internally feel that you're doing something wrong because you followed the rules, at least you thought you did, and you're not seeing the outcome. So I must have personally missed something. I must have misunderstood something. And so during 2020, there was a pandemic. I'm not sure if that was, I think it was in the news.
I know that.
I was coming off of like a really bad work relationship, and one in which I was left feeling totally like sapped of any self-esteem. And I was in a pandemic, just lost my job, and I felt like I have nowhere to go. There's a hiring, there's a glutton of people looking for jobs, and I'm one that obviously couldn't make it in my previous job. I also don't seem to be really good at what I do because of what I was told at work, and I really internalize it. Also, I have dyslexia. I also have ADHD, and so I'm also a Black man, so a lot of strikes against me, and so I just could not figure out like what do I do. There's no place where I feel I can fit in, and Just Work basically gave me a framework of how work should be conducted, how people should relate to each other in a work setting, and it allowed me to kind of remap my experience onto this new framework and distinguish where I was failing the company or failing to do my job and where the company and the leadership was failing to support me. And being able to untangle that, unravel that kind of embedded self hate, loathing, and kind of remove it and put it in the place where it belongs, it allowed me to kind of like focus on working on the things I can control and the things that I myself was taking accountability for, but also offloading it and saying like, I was wrong. The system did fail me, and really say that this is a cosmos of injustice in this specific scenario. And it allowed me to use that framework also to kind of vet my next company and the next place I would go to, for the signs or red flags where I could be entering a similar situation.
And I think what you say is so meaningful and profound, and something I think I didn't realize enough when I wrote Radical Candor, because if one is underrepresented, which we both are in different ways, then you get a lot of bias, prejudice, and bullying masquerading as feedback. And so the feedback that you're getting, there's maybe more chaff than wheat. And separating the chaff from the wheat of your feedback so that you're taking on board the feedback that is really helpful for you and rejecting the feedback that is nothing but bias, prejudice, and bullying is tricky. It's hard not to feel gaslit, sort of, which is what you're describing, having felt at your companies. Does that make sense to
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, it's like going to like a Michelin starred restaurant with an unrefined palate and
Yes.
tasting something and saying, I don't like it.
Yeah.
And
And it's
when
okay that I
asked,
don't like it.
but when the thing that is not liked is me
Yeah.
in this
Yes.
example, and not being able to get feedback, saying, what is it that you don't like? Can you pinpoint the thing? What is the aroma? What is the ingredient? What is the
Yes.
texture? And they're like, I don't know. I just don't like it. It's not
Yeah.
something I'm used to.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the experience I had where if someone doesn't have the vocabulary, they don't have the words or the framework to express that, then it's just, that's the feedback you get, is just 100% negativity. And you're
Yes.
unable to find the notes of where things actually can be enhanced or ratchet up to kind of compensate for the whole entire package. And
Yes.
that's what it was like not being able to get the details, because the people who were giving me the feedback didn't know this stuff and couldn't impart it and couldn't figure out why they didn't like me so much. And that failing was one in which I was an easy scapegoat.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I totally misunderstood your analogy too. I thought anyway, when you're in the Michelin restaurant, I misunderstood. But yes,
Oh
now
yeah,
I get it.
yes.
I'm tracking now. I'm tracking.
Yes, I'm the product in this example.
Yes. Sorry, I thought it was the product was the feedback, and you didn't like the way it tasted. Anyway, I was imagining you were the consumer of the
Gotcha. Yes.
not the product. Anyway, so I want to explain to folks why Wesley is here and why why Ernest Adams is not here. So Ernest just took a big new job, which we revealed in our last podcast episode. And so he needs to focus on Ford and making them successful, and doesn't have time to continue on the podcast. And at the same time, Wesley and I had been sort of talking about how to create community and how to create solidarity around these ideas. And Wesley, you know a lot about creating community. So one of the things we're hoping is that as you're listening to this podcast, you'll write into us with examples of these things happening to you, and that maybe you'll join us on future episodes of the podcast to create more just work environments. Wesley, any thoughts on building community around these ideas?
You mentioned gaslighting before, or I did, and usually gaslighting happens usually in a vacuum where you feel singled out, you feel like you're the othered in the situation, where the issue is not everyone's having this issue, it's just I'm having this issue.
Yeah.
And so I also hope that this is a space in terms of community where that atrocity can bring us all together and we can heal as a group, because the otherness is not where you should be. You should be with us, and we are the person on the right side of the line. We're trying to enact change. And if you are a victim of that change, or if you have been on the side of where you can bring some of this to light so that others also can use that as a beacon to follow us into the trajectory of a greater good, into a greater work environment, please join us. I want everyone to tell their story so we can feel all less alone together.
Yes, I love that. So one of the things that we'll be doing is inspired by Ernest Adams. I have done a pretty major rewrite of Just Work. And so Ernest and I started reading, and now the stuff that Ernest and I read together has been rewritten. So Wesley and I are going to start from the beginning again. And what I thought we would do today, if it's okay, Wesley, is just read the introduction quickly. And it's kind of long. Usually we'll try to read no more than 1 or 2 pages. This is about 4 pages, but I'll try to read fast, but not annoyingly fast. So Wesley, give me some feedback as I go. And and I'm going to invite Wesley to sort of interrupt me with things that strike him as I'm reading, or we can talk at the end. So we'll see how this goes. Just as the Spirit moves you, Wesley, either jot down notes or tell me to stop. So
yes,
this
I'll
is
probably
the what's that?
Interrupt you. I'll probably interrupt you and just chime in as I hear something.
Good. And I know there's like a lot of stuff about women getting interrupted. Let me just say at the outset that I have invited Wesley to interrupt me. I want to be interrupted. Wesley is in no way, shape, or form interrupting me. And he's clarifying for everybody's sake. All right. So now that we have that, we've put that bias aside. Here's the introduction. It's called "We Can't Fix Problems We Refuse to Notice." In 2017, I published a book called Radical Candor. If you write a book about feedback, you're bound to get a lot of it. And indeed, I did. The criticism I got enriched my life immeasurably, deepening my thinking on a topic I thought I was already an expert on. It was humbling, enlightening, and liberating all at the same time. Hands down, the best feedback I got came from Michelle, who'd been a colleague for the better part of a decade. I liked and respected Michelle enormously and was thrilled when she invited me to give a talk about radical candor to the tech startup where she was CEO. When I finished giving the presentation, Michelle pulled me aside and said, "I'm excited to roll out Radical Candor here, Kim. I think it's going to help me build the kind of innovative culture that we need to succeed. But I got to tell you, as soon as I give anyone the most gentle, compassionate criticism, I get accused of being an angry Black woman." I knew this was true and profoundly unfair. I'd been in innumerable meetings with Michelle. I'd never once heard her raise her voice or even seem annoyed, let alone angry. Michelle is objectively one of the most even-keeled, reasonable people I've ever met. It is ridiculous to call her angry, and following that up with Black and woman was no small hint that this was not a fair, reasonable assessment. This prompted...
Okay, this is where my first interruption point is.
Okay, excellent.
So she obviously understood how she fit in the radical candor feedback. So it seemed as if this is good for other people, not me. So that's what she's identifying right there. My quick question is, why?
Yeah,
how does she feel? How does it make sense for her to be able to enact something that she believes in, but yet doesn't feel like she applies to it? How did she reconcile that to you?
Yeah, I think as we talked about it, she said she didn't say it was impossible for her. She just said it was harder for her than it was for me. And, and maybe I should there's still time to make more edits. I should probably make these clarifications. So thank you. The other thing she pointed out to me, which was true, is she said, "I bet it's harder for you to put it into practice, Kim, than it is for your husband, who's a white man." And that was exactly true. It is. And so the point is not that it doesn't work, but that it's harder for people who are underrepresented to put it into practice. And it is everybody's job to make something that is valuable equally easy for everyone to put into practice. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I'm assuming the power dynamic also allowed her to be able to get to the point where she was able to force the issue as opposed to on the other side.
I think so. The power dynamics are something we're going to talk a lot about as we read this, talk a lot about as we read through this. And power dynamics are problematic. So in some ways, it was easier for her to be radically candid since she was CEO. And in other ways, it was harder. Like, I think one of the things that we'll talk a lot about is the difficulty of being the underrepresented leader. And so she wanted to create an environment in which when she would offer someone criticism, they would welcome it. But because of who she was, and as a leader, as a Black leader, people were sometimes even more inclined to see her as angry because they didn't like a powerful Black woman in their life, and so they would reject it and pretend that it wasn't racism and sexism that were at play. They would pretend like that she had objectively done something wrong. So I think that as the underrepresented leader, I mean, and I don't want to talk. We should bring her on and ask her. I will explain some of the things that happened to me as a
Right.
woman CEO as we go on. But in fact, let's just pause here and do it. In fact, let's just stop here. I think we've read enough for today. Let's stop here and talk about this because it's a really interesting question. So when I became CEO of a software company that I started, I assumed the days of me getting bullied were over because I
Right.
thought, who's going to bully the CEO? Not true. So an
Yes, people in
anecdote.
power never get criticized. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They don't get criticized as often as they should, but sometimes they do get bullied, right? And so I was working with a guy who was sort of failing to deliver on a project. And I said to him, I gave him some feedback about the project. And at the end of the conversation, I asked him, as I always try to do in such a situation, I said, what could I do or stop doing that would help get this back on track, help you get this project back on track? And he said, the problem here is you are the most aggressive woman I ever met. And I was like, if I'm the most aggressive woman you ever met, I'm not even on the list of the top 100 most aggressive men you ever met. And we're in an aggressive industry, and part of your job is dealing with these aggressive people. So your problem is clearly not my aggression. Your problem is my gender. And in my case, it's not going to change. I am who I am. And that's not what I said. That's kind of what I was thinking.
That's
And
awesome, though.
probably, frankly, what I should have said. But it's easier to think of what you should have said in hindsight. Instead, I just kind of, and part of the reason why I didn't say any of that was because I wanted to create this environment where people could speak truth to power, but I didn't want to create an environment where people could bully women, and that
Yeah.
was, I was in a tricky situation. I don't know. What would you have done in that situation? What do you
Well,
think
that's
about
more
that
of
situation?
it's closer to an ad hominem attack because
Yeah, of course.
it is characterizing you as a person and not as a specific action you did.
Yeah. Well,
Or talking about the impact, it's just more like, what's our roadblock? You're a horrible person. You're a pushy person. You're
yeah.
a angry person. That doesn't really point to a solution.
Yes,
And
yes, and if he had been the CEO and I had been the employee, I would have said yes, 100%. But it's a little
mhm,
trickier when you're the leader, because when you're the leader
right,
and you're trying to put in place, build a collaborative culture, you want to lay that power down. And so I will, like, for example, my daughter gave me some feedback recently. I wish you weren't the radical candor lady. And immediately, I felt defensive. I felt like this wave of parental guilt wash over me. But I realized it was my job to not get defensive, not assume that she meant that I was spending too much time at work, which is why I was getting defensive, but to ask some questions and not to criticize the criticism in the moment. Like, I think as the parent or as the person in a relationship where you have some authority over the other person, you definitely don't want to criticize the criticism. You want to sort of make sure you understand it. And so I said, well, who do you wish I were? She said, I wish you were the lady who minded her own business. And so it was a very different kind of, but my point is that when you,
in the
especially
response to
when,
that, do you just say, okay, well, I'll ask no more questions?
no, I understood. So my response there was, I was about to take her on a field trip, and she was afraid I would embarrass her in front of her friends.
Oh, okay. It's like every
By
parent.
you know, yeah. But so I said, okay, if I'm starting to embarrass you, here's what you can do in the moment. Pull your ear or whatever. And so the point is that it's a little tricky when you're the underrepresented leader, because you've got to lay your power down. You cannot force sort of a culture on people. You cannot, you can't, if you're the leader and you say, I will not tolerate any, then all of a sudden what you're doing is you're driving bad behavior underground. And so it's tricky. It's especially tricky. I mean, in retrospect, I wish what I had done with this guy is to say, look, if there are specific things I'm doing that are making it hard for you to get your work done, I want to know about them. But I got to tell you how what you're saying sounds to me. It sounds to me like you're just trying to get me to back off, and you're kind of bullying me. And what's going on with that? Um, so instead, when you are the leader and someone is bullying you, you really want to ask some questions, some you questions. What's going on for you here? What's really the problem? Because you want to make sure that the other person knows that you're open to real feedback, but that it's not okay to bully you or anyone else, especially as a result of gender or race or anything else. But it's tricky, right?
Yeah, I was actually in a similar situation a few weeks ago. I was kind of like put in charge of a smaller sub team in our group, and I was rolling out a policy that I was told to kind of enact, and some people were really mad about the new policy. And if I had someone in that same situation um, say something like "you're too aggressive" or "you're too overbearing," what I've tried is, and what I did in this meeting was put up straw men. So what does that look like to you? Would that look like less frequent updates? We move from once a week to once every other week.
Mm-hmm.
And also what I did in the policy, if people were like, I don't like this wording sucks, or this, I said, what word would feel better to you? What word should
Yeah.
we replace it with? And because I know I have no pull on changing the policy, but I would love to have constructive feedback of saying, okay, I would write this. I'm going to write this down, and I'm going to take this to talk to the people or the powers that be. What should I tell them? And
Yeah.
then that way it shifts the feedback from directly to me to, okay, now I need to rephrase this into something that's actionable because it's going to be going over to someone else.
Yeah. No, I love that example. So you're getting on the same side of the table with someone.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
no
I'm
matter
not here
what,
to, I'm just, let's work together. Let's figure out what is
yeah.
the optimal solution and how
Yeah.
do we merge what we currently have into the new formation that we both can agree on.
Yeah. I think that's exactly the right way to handle it. And I think by asking questions and inviting the person on the same side of the table with you, you're laying your power down. You're showing that you want to optimize for collaboration. You're not trying to coerce them in any way, but you're also not going to take any shit from them, which is also important for them to know. And it's important for them to know, both for your sake, but also for the sake of the whole organization. Because by not, in that case of the "you are the most aggressive woman" guy, I didn't really say anything to him. And then he treated the other, if he was going to treat me, the CEO, that way, how was he going to treat the women who worked for him? And I unfortunately, I tell the story in the book, but so I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't want to give too much away, but I unfortunately had the opportunity to see just how bad it would get.
Oh, wow. Well, yes, I've read ahead. So of course I know what happens.
You know what happened.
One other thing that happened is that you also mentioned in the book foreshadowing about how whoever's in charge is not the ultimate arbiter. They're not totally holding all of the power. And one
Yeah.
thing I did in that meeting is I reminded people, if you disagree with me, you can go over my head. You can make a complaint over here and
Yeah.
say that there are outlets to kind of like balance my power or check me. And I made sure that that was fairly transparent in terms of, if you're choosing to like fight against me, this is where you go. This is who you talk to, and this is the form you fill out. Just because I didn't want it to say, if it's my way or the highway, what I say
Yeah.
goes. It's just saying, this is a system. This is made to try to be an equitable balance. And if you feel that the balance has shifted in the wrong direction, this is how you can get some of that power back.
That is the essence of great leadership, is putting checks and balances on your own power, and how to make sure. Very often when at least when I have gotten a little bit of power, I've been more prone to bully others, and I do not want to be a bully. So the best thing you can do is put some checks and balances on your power. I want to ask you a question about this new introduction. So the rest of it, we're not going to read the whole thing, but the rest of it is talking about the different roles. Like first of all, how often bias, prejudice, and bullying masquerade as feedback, and also how I hadn't been an upstander for Michelle. I had been in denial about the kinds of things that happened to me as a woman in the workplace. I realized that sometimes I was the culprit, which I call in the book the bad guy in quotes. So I want to get your thoughts on that, and that as a leader, it's your job to prevent these things from happening. And so I sort of use this story to talk about the roles and responsibilities. But I want to get your thoughts, Wesley, on starting the book with this story instead of the story that I started the first edition of Just Work with, which was a much more intense story that goes all the way to physical violations. My hope is that this will show people more clearly the framework, and that we build it up over time. But what do you think of this new beginning?
I like the new beginning, and I'll tell you two reasons. One is that the aha moment or the spark or the thing that ignites, like, I need to write this down, I need to make a book about this, I think is a great way to start, because that is the beginning. That's where it
Yeah.
started. And the other part is you actually talk about radical candor, which I feel has been, as you put it, you're the radical candor lady, as that's what you're
Yes.
known. And so it also it draws a direct line of where radical candor stopped and where just work began, and how they are related and why they are important, and almost how just work is a companion piece that kind of finishes the story or continues the journey to kind of understand how all of this is integrated. So for those two reasons is why I think I like this beginning better than the previous one.
Great. Thank you. And what don't you
And
like about
visually,
it?
it sets
What
the
do,
stage.
yeah.
Literally,
What do you miss about the old? Is there something that I didn't include that you missed?
one thing is you bring in it's. I think we had a conversation about this. Is that I think all the elements are there. They're just in different orders.
Yeah.
The personal part of it. The thing that I was listening to this the other day in the news over the weekend, or there was the Chris Rock Netflix special thing
Yeah.
where he talks about Will Smith slapping him, and he mentioned how that he wasn't going to be a victim, and how he wasn't. You're not going to see him on Oprah talking about it. And I think, and in the opening, you mentioned that, and I think we also talked about this before, about there's a negativity of being victimized, and I don't think of it, and that's what a victim is someone who is um, subjugated to someone else's harshness in a way that crosses a line to abuse.
Yeah.
And And so I want to kind of release the stigma of being a victim, because that is not
Yeah.
something that you can control. It is something that is thrust upon you, and is not
Yeah.
something you can control. You can't say I don't want to be a victim if you are a victim. That's just there's a negativity with that label. I think that also kind of pushes people into silence and into the side of society where those are the people who just cry about things, or people who don't know how to deal with things, or people who don't brush things off, which is I think allows people to um, take people complaining about something and dismiss it as someone who is just weak in some sort of way.
Yeah, I think that is really, really important. I mean, as the bumper sticker says, shit happens. And sometimes shit happens to you. And that doesn't mean you are a victim, but it means you were a victim in that instance. And if we can't recognize it when we have been the victim of something, then we're going to get gaslit. So I think that's a really important point.
Yeah. And it's okay to get help when you've been victimized. And
Yeah.
I
Not
encourage
only
anyone
is it
to do
okay,
that.
it's essential for most, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, for me at least, for most of us, it is help from the outside is really is essential to recovering.
Yes. So that's one thing that I won't say I should be removed or changed because the revision's in, but it's a good thing to talk about. And um, if we sanitize it too much in terms of removing all that, it feels like it's losing some of the character, which I think is also important. But also, uh, the way that people self-identify, I think, is also something that is also should be protected in some sort of way. Like if you call yourself something, that label in terms of self-identifying is also something that should be respected.
Yes, absolutely. I get to decide who I am. You get to decide who you are, and we respect each other
Yes.
in the way we identify and the words we use. Actually, I think that's one of the things that people are longing for, these objectively correct terms to use. But however you call yourself, that's what I need to respect.
Yes.
And
Yes.
however whatever I call, if I say I'm a victim, like, respect that.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. But those are
Awesome.
my notes.
Well, Wesley, I'm so excited to do this with you. Thank you for agreeing to do it, and really excited to hear from listeners about the stuff that is happening and how Wesley and I can help. You can send us a note, hello@justworktogether.com, and tell us your story, ask us your question, present us with your dilemma. And hopefully, we don't have all the answers, but we certainly are happy to discuss and to offer solidarity and thoughts.
Yes, and if you have feedback about this new format, I would love to hear that as well. I know that I stutter sometimes. I stumble over my words, mispronounce things. I interrupt people in the middle of a podcast. So I would love to hear your feedback about that.
It's all good, Wesley. Really loved the conversation. Thank you so much. And thanks to our listeners. And Wesley's right. Send us feedback as well as stories. Hello@justworktogether.com. Take care, everybody.
Goodbye.